Yesterday, we looked at the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph, and we learned that there are a number of situations where a person will be off the hook for capital punishment if he commits murder because he did not have proper intent. And even though he may have intended to commit murder, but if he intended to murder someone for whom the penalty is not capital, and he ends up killing someone for whom the penalty is capital, he will still be off the hook. So we learned in the beginning of the Mishnah that let's say a person intends to kill an animal or a Gentile or a non-viable infant, and he ends up killing instead a viable Jew. So then, even though normally the death penalty is administered, but since his intent was not there, even though his intent was for murder, but it was not an intent of murdering a Jew, he does not get capital punishment. So that was the first thing. We also learned yesterday in the Mishnah that in the event that a person intends to apply lethal force, then he'll get the death penalty even if his blow ended up in the wrong part of the body and ended up killing the person. But if he intended not to use lethal force, because he intended to strike him at a certain part of the body where the impact of such a blow would not be lethal, and ended up hitting him somewhere else in the body where that impact of that blow is lethal, he also will not be liable. But the Tanna Kamma's conclusion was that if his intent is to kill a Jew, and the blow is a lethal impact blow, then even if he ends up killing the wrong person, he's going to be liable for the death penalty. And that's where Reb Shimon disagreed, because the case of the Tanna Kamma was that if he intended to strike a big guy with lethal force, and he ended up instead striking a little guy, and that also certainly had lethal force, so then he's going to be chayiv misa. But the last line we learned was Reb Shimon Oimer afilu niskavin la'aro gezeh v'hara gezeh pater. Reb Shimon says no. Even if your intention was to kill A and you end up killing B instead, even though they're both Jewish and both of them have the impact had lethal effect, you're going to be off the hook. So the Gemara's first just wants to clarify. I believe that the purpose of this discussion is not to clarify Reb Shimon's halachic position, because it's going to end up being the same. But it's really just trying to clarify his language. Rabbi Shimon Ahaya. What part of the Mishnah was Rabbi Shimon addressing? Ilema aseifa Reb Shimon poiter mi boilei. If Reb Shimon was going on the most previous statement of the Mishnah, which is that if you intend to apply lethal force to a big guy and you accidentally hit the small guy instead, so then you're chayiv misa, Reb Shimon says in that case no, because it's not the guy that you intended to kill. Then he should, instead of saying a long sentence, it should have just said Reb Shimon poter. Reb Shimon exempts in the case that the previous statement holds that you're chayiv. So Ella Aresha, but rather you're right. Reb Shimon is really addressing the first case of the Mishnah, and wants to point out that the only place where I argue is in the Resha, because the intent was to kill A and you instead killed B. But there are going to be situations where I will agree with the Tana. For example, if you intended to strike one place and you ended up striking another place, as long as both places have a lethal effect, I will agree that you're going to be chayiv misa. So what did the Resha say? Niskavin laharoges abehema v'arages ha'adam la'avikuchav v'arages Yisrael and afilim v'arages ben kayama pater. So the Mishnah had said that according to the Tanna Kamma, if your intent is to kill someone for whom the penalty is not death, such as a behema, a Gentile, or a nafel, or a non-viable infant, so then the halacha is that you don't get the death penalty. But the inference is that that by inference, as long as the intended party is a Jew who's viable, then even if you ended up killing the wrong person, you would still get the death penalty. And on that, Reb Shimon Oimer afilu niskavin la'aro gezeh v'hara gezeh pater. And Reb Shimon says, no, I hold, even if both parties, the intended party and the party that you actually murdered, were both Jewish and viable, you will not get the death penalty because the person that you intended to kill is not the actual victim. So the Gemara now says, Pshita, koi Ruven v'Shimon v'amar ana l'Ruven kamichavna, l'Shimon lo kamichavna, hainu pliktahu. So the Gemara says what is fairly obvious is that a case where they would clearly disagree, the Tanna Kamma and Reb Shimon, is in the following scenario, where the murderer says, I plan to kill Ruven, and he then shoots his gun or his bow and arrow and ends up shooting Shimon. In other words, he said explicitly, I plan only to kill Reuven and not Shimon, and he ends up killing Shimon instead. The Tanakama would say you don't get the death penalty, and the Tanakama would say you do get the death penalty, and Rav Shimon says you don't. But Amr lechad minai hu mai, inami kesova Reuven v'nimsa Shimon mai. But the Gemara says, let me ask you two questions. Question number one is, what would be the halacha if a guy says, unfortunately we just had this case, where a person says, I don't care who I kill, just a random, whoever I kill, I'm going to kill. And he doesn't identify the intended party. So what would Reb Shimon hold in that situation? He says, I'm just going to shoot somebody. He doesn't say, I don't care who it is. Or, let me ask you another question. What will Reb Shimon hold in a case where he says, I'm going to kill Reuven, and he points to the guy who he thinks is Reuven, but it's really Shimon? In that situation, would Reb Shimon say that you're chayiv or pater, because after all, you did kill the person that you intended to kill? So Tashma, so come and listen. D'Tanya, Reb Shimon Omer, Ad sheyomer leploni ani miskave. So Reb Shimon says explicitly in the Brisa that you must identify correctly, specifically the person that you wish to kill. So if you don't identify, you say, it doesn't matter to me who it is, then according to Reb Shimon, you're pater. And also, if you identify the person incorrectly by thinking that he's Reuven when he's really Shimon, you're also going to be pater. So the question now is this: Reb Shimon is so liberal to let this guy off. What's his reasoning? My time with the Reb Shimon. Omar krav ve'orav lo v'kam alav ad shiskaving lo. We have an extra phrase in the pasuk that says, "You shall lay an ambush for him." Him is to the exclusion of when you're not thinking of a specific party. So you have to be thinking of a specific party and get it right in order to be chayiv misa. The Rabbanan Amri Devei Rabbi Yanai Prat Lazarik Evan Legav, and the Chachamim tell you that pasuk, that extra phrase in the pasuk, is not addressing the case that we're talking about now, where you thought you were killing A and you really killed B, because that you're going to be chayiv misa. When are you pater? When you throw a rock or you shoot a gun into a crowd of people. In that situation, again, very unfortunately, sadly, tragically, very topical to the current events. When you shoot a gun into a crowd of people, in that situation, you might have thought that you're going to be pater. You might be chayev. Comes along the pasuk and tells you that you're pater in that case, even though invariably you're going to kill someone. So the Gemara now says, "Hey chidami." So what's the case over there? He says, I don't understand. If you're talking about where everyone is Jewish, so then why is it any different, according to the Chachamim, from thinking you're killing Reuven and killing Shimon instead? So what are you going to suggest? That we're talking about a crowd of people where the majority of the people are Gentile? So let's say you have 9 Gentiles and 1 Jew, and you throw a rock, and you know you're going to hit somebody. So in that situation, the Torah tells you you're pater. What do you need the Torah to tell you you're pater there? We have a general rule of Heilach Achar Arov. You go after the majority. And since killing a Gentile is murder, but it doesn't get the capital punishment for it, so then why would I think otherwise? Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that he's pater when the Rov already tells me that he's pater, because you always go after the majority in a case like that? Inami palgo safek nefashos lahakil. And even if you're going to tell me that it's 50% Jew and 50% Gentile, 5 and 5, well then even in that case, it's a suffix at best who he's going to kill. So the beit din would always try and exonerate whenever they can. So whenever there's a suffix, an exact suffix, you would have to exonerate the murderer anyway from the death penalty. So we don't need a special pasuk for that. So what? Lo tzricha diikatisha yisol v'kusi echad b'neihem. So the answer is that the chiddush of the Torah is like this. If they're all Jewish, so then according to the Chachamim, you're chayiv misa. Because according to the Chachamim, as long as you have intent to murder, you don't need to know the specific identity of the Jew. As long as you know for sure that you're going to kill a Jew, it doesn't matter that you didn't know his name. You're going to be chayiv. But what we're talking about is there's a crowd of people, and even if 9 of them are Jewish and 1 of them is Gentile, 90% are Jewish and 10% are Gentile, the chiddush of the Torah is that even there you're going to be pater. Why? Because there's a special principle that it's very difficult to understand the logic of it, but therefore it's exeres hakasav, that kol kavua kemachza al machza dami. That no, regardless of the proportions that are in a contained system, whenever you have a combination, we always look at it as 50-50, regardless of the actual proportions. And therefore, and this, by the way, has ramifications in kashrus,
Yes.
right? Esther chanuyos, exactly, right? So we'll learn more about this in Maseches Chulin, but as it pertains to here, we view this as being 50-50, 50% Jewish, 50% Gentile, and therefore Safek Nefashos Lahakil. Whenever you have a Safek Hashakal, you always have to go lenient in administering the death penalty. So therefore, that's the Chiddush of the Torah of the Orav Lo. Now, the Gemara now says, Bishlam l'Rabbanan damri niskavein laharog es zev harag es chayev d'chsiv v'chiyin atzu anashim and agafu isha hara. So he says, we're going to revisit a pasuk that we saw a few days ago. The Torah was talking about a case where two guys are fighting, and one guy takes a swing, which, as we'll see in a minute, he intends to apply lethal force to his opponent, and instead of hitting his opponent, he hits a pregnant woman and causes her to miscarry. And the Torah says that in that situation, he has to pay for the compensation for the miscarriage of the fetus. And the case over there is that the person intends to apply lethal force. And the Torah says that if he didn't end up killing anyone, but instead caused the miscarriage of a fetus, which is unborn and therefore doesn't have the status halachically of a full-fledged life, so therefore he only has to pay, but does not put to death. But then the Torah says, V'imason yihiyeh, but if there is a death, because instead when he strikes the pregnant woman, he ends up killing her, so then v'nosato-nefesh-danger-life. So then you have to give him the death penalty. A soul for a soul, right? That implies the death penalty. Now, it makes sense according to the Chachamim that even though you intended to kill your opponent, but you ended up killing the pregnant woman, you still get the death penalty because you intended to kill a Jew, you applied lethal force, you get the death penalty. But Elo the Reb Shimon, but according to Reb Shimon, if you intended to kill your opponent and intended killing the wrong person, you're parted from the death penalty. So how can the Torah say v'nasato nefesh tachas nefesh, a life for a life? The Gemara answers mammon, because it's really Reb Shimon says the words v'nasato nefesh tachas nefesh does not mean give him the death penalty, but rather make him pay to her, the heirs of this woman, restitution for her death. The Rebbe, the Tanya Rebbe oimer v'nasato nefesh tachas nefesh mammon, and that's exactly the way Rabbi Yehuda Nasi learns that pasuk in the Brisa. Ata omer mammon oino ela nefesh mamish. Maybe you'll say no. Maybe it means put the guy to death. So to prove that that's not the case, look at the way the verbiage is. Nemra nesina lamata, v'nemra nesina lamayla. Mala halin mamon, afkan mama. It says in the previous pasuk, v'lo yihiyeh ason, if there's no death resulting from the blow, so then what does the Torah say? You have to make monetary compensation, v'nosan biflilim. You shall pay restitution for the loss, right? But the verb v'nosan is used over there. And just like over there it means monetary compensation, so too over here when it says v'nosata, uses the same verb of you shall give, means you shall give monetary payment. So Amar Rava, Haidetana de Bechizkiya, Mafkim mid Rebbe, Umafkim mid Rabbana. Now Rava says, we have a third Tana. So far what we've seen the Chachamim say that if you killed the wrong person, but your intent for murder was still there, you're chayiv misa. Now we see Reb Shimon and Rebbe hold that if you killed the wrong person, you have to make monetary restitution to that person's heirs. But now we're going to see a third opinion who holds that A, you don't get misa, like Reb Shimon says, but you also don't have to make monetary restitution. You basically get off scot-free, according to this opinion, which is Tana de Bechizkiya. And where do we see that? The Tana de Bechizkiya, Makei Adam u Makei Behema. Ma Makei Behema lo chalakta ba ben shogeg lemezid ben miskavin l'shenu miskavin ben derech yirida l'derech aliyah l'potra mamon elo l'chayvo mamon. Af Makei Adam lo tachlok bo ben shogeg lemezid ben miskavin l'shenu miskavin ben derech yirida l'derech aliyah l'chayvo mamon elo l'potra mamon. So, the Brisa basically says, according to Tana de Bechizkiya, that we have a pasuk in the Torah that connects killing an animal to killing a human being. It says, Makei behima yishalmena, umakei adam yumas. If you strike an animal, you shall pay. if you strike a human, you shall die. Why does the Torah connect the two together? It connects the two together to tell you as follows. That just like when you kill a person's property, his chattel, the halacha is that you have to pay nezek, regardless of what your intent was, whether it was shogeg or mezid, or whether it was derech aliyah, derech yerida, which we're learning in Maseches Makos. You only have to go to in your miklat if the weapon that you used to strike with accidentally is on its way down, but not if it's on its way going up against gravity, right? So just like by nezikin, it makes no difference. If you're playing baseball and you break a guy's window, you got to pay for the window, even if it was totally an accident. The same thing, if you kill his animal, you got to pay for it regardless of what the intent was. So too, when you kill a human being, it makes no difference what the intent is. You will never have to pay mammon. Just like by an animal, you always have to pay mammon. By a human being, you never have to pay mammon. That's why the Torah connects the two together, to tell you that there's consistency in both cases. So, my she'ein miskapin, what does the words in the Brisa mean? That you didn't have intent. Now, it can't mean shogeg, because shogeg is also stated in the Brisa. Ilay she'ein miskapin klal hainu shogeg. If you're going to tell me that he has no intent at all to kill, then why did you have to say both, whether it's shogeg or whether it's eino miskapin? That's redundant. So, elapshita she'ein miskapin lazeh ela lazeh, uketani l'chayvo mamon ela lepotro mamon. So he says, so it must be that Tanat Vechizki was saying that not only if you kill b'shogeg you don't pay, but also if you pay she'ein miskapin means that you intended to kill A, but you instead killed B, you also don't have to pay. Now, v'ibar ketalahu mayitzterich lemifterei mamon. And he can't be saying that the reason why that such a case is patur from mammon is because he's chayiv misa, because then obviously he wouldn't have to pay mammon based on the principle that anyone who's chayiv misa never has to pay monetary compensation. So elalav shma mina lav bar ketolahu v'lav bar bamonu. So it must be that this brisa learns that you get off scot-free. You don't have to pay mammon, you don't have to pay money, and you don't get the death penalty either. Someone asked me this morning at the daf, Dov Apter asked, so then Taka, how do you learn the pasuk? If the pasuk says v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh, what does it mean? If it doesn't mean death penalty and it doesn't mean mammon, so what does it mean according to Tanat Vechizki? So he says that Tosfos asked this question. I didn't have a chance to look in Tosfos, but he told me that he looked afterwards, and Tosfos says that according to Tanat Vechizki, you have to learn that the only time the Torah says v'nasata nefesh tachas nefesh is if Itaka intended to kill the woman. In other words, the only time a person is chayiv misa is if he actually intended to kill the party he wanted to kill. And that's like Rav Shimon. Okay, let us go weiter.
If he kills Shimon, instead of Reuven, is he entitled to go to Ir Miklah, protect himself from the Gol Hadam?
No, that's not called shogeg.
So the Gol Hadam could go after him?
That's a good question about a Gol Hadam. Can the Gol Hadam go after him? Presumably not, because Gol Hadam only has reshus to go after someone who had the obligation to go to an Ir Miklat and didn't.
Right.
But if a person killed b'mezid, again, we'll have to see when we learn Maseches Makos what are the parameters of a Gol Hadam. It's a good question. Okay, next Mishnah. Rotzeach shenisaref ba'acherim kulan peturin, and Rabbi Yehuda Omer konsen osam lekipa. A person who's a convicted murderer, and he gets mixed up with other people, and now we don't know who he is, right? We put him in a lineup, and we don't know which one is the guy who's the murderer.
For a red face.
No DNA.
Right. So what do you do? Basically, the Tanakama says they all can go free because you have no other choice. But Rabbi Yehuda says no. Take all of them that are mixed in this crowd, and put them in a barn and let them starve to death. Rashi says you put in barley there, and they eat and eat and eat until their stomachs burst. But in any way, you let them die just on their own. Which is pretty harsh if we're talking about innocent bystanders. So let's see what we're talking about. So the chol chayv miso shenisarvu zeh b'zeh nidonin b'kala, and furthermore, let's say you have a group of people that were all found to be they were pronounced guilty in beit-din, and that sentence was pronounced upon them, but they have different death penalties. Some of them have chenek, some have stila, some have sreifa, right? They're all got mixed together. So what's the halacha? You have to give all of them the lightest form of what the lowest common denominator, which only makes sense. the least harsh of the death penalties of them all combined. So let's just speak it out. Haniskolin bin Yisrafim, let's say you have a group of people, let's say one guy is chayiv skila and one guy is chayiv sreifa, and now you got mixed up and you don't know which one is which. So you got to give the less harsh. And remember, we have this classic machlokas that we saw in the previous parak as which death penalty is less harsh and which one is more harsh. So Reb Shimon oimer nidonin b'skila she'asreifa chamura, v'chachamim omer nidonin b'sreifa she'askila chamura. So Reb Shimon says that give them the less harsh death penalty, which is skila, because sreifa is harsher. And the chachamim say no, give them sreifa because skila is harsher. So Amar lehen Reb Shimon, ila lo haisa sreifa chamura lo nitnu labas kohen shezinsa. So Reb Shimon says, let me prove my point. I'll prove to you that sreifa is harsher than skila because it's given to a bas kohen who disgraces her family by committing an act of znus. So you see that it's the harshest death penalty. So Amr lo, ilu lo haisa skila chamur lo nitnu lo megadef lo ovid avodas kochavim and erogim. I'm sorry, lo ovid avodas kochavim. Period. And the chachamim say back to him, no, I'll prove to you that skila is the harsher, because if it wasn't the harshest, why would it be administered to someone who commits avodah-zarah and who blasphemes God? I mean, the most oppositional crime that you can commit against Hashem is avodah-zarah and megadef. So therefore, if that's skila, it shows that the skila is the harshest death penalty, and therefore give him sreifa. And another example is on the erogim ben echnakim, where you have a similar machlokas, which we learned about previously, that if you have one guy who's chayiv death by the sword, and another guy who's chayiv death by strangulation, and they get mixed up. So here too you have a machlokas. Reb Shimon omer b'sayif and Chachamim omer b'chenek. Reb Shimon says the less harsh death penalty is sword, so kill them both by the sword. And the Chachamim say no, the less harsh is chenek, kill them both by chenek. So the Gemara now says manachem. So let's go back to the first case. A guy's convicted murderer gets mixed up with a group of people. Who are these people? Like what's their story? So ilay ma'acherim ksherim. If you tell me they're perfectly innocent bystanders, so then pshita, then obviously you can't kill them. You're not going to be machmir, kill them all just in case, because that's ridiculous. Of course, you don't need the chachamim to tell you that. Visu baha lema Rabbi Yehuda konsinos on the kippah question mark. And furthermore, how could Rabbi Yehuda even suggest, if they're innocent people, that you lock them up in a barn and let them starve to death or let them eat themselves to death? So Amar Rabavahu, Amar Shmuel, Hacha birotzeach shelo nigmar dino shenisaret birotzchem acherim shenigmar dino naskina. So Rabavahu says, I'll tell you what we're talking about. Everyone in this crowd has committed murder. They're all a bunch of murderers. The difference is that, and we've all and we know this because the beit-din has received testimony on each one of these guys that he's a murderer. The difference is that one of them has been convicted already and the verdict has been pronounced in his presence. The other ones have not been convicted. We just accepted testimony. So beit-din was about to convict them, and then they all got mixed up. Someone lost the keys to the jail cell, they opened up all the cells, and they all got mixed in together. So the problem is that Rabbanan Savri ein gormin dina shel adam ela b'fanav hilkach kulan peturin. V'Rabbi Yehuda miftarinu legamrei nami lo keven derotz chaninu hilkach konsinos an lekipa. So the machlokus between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is as follows. The Chachamim say that according to the Torah, you can only convict someone when you're directing that person, and you know exactly who you're speaking to. Because that way, at the final verdict, the person can always chime in and say, I have a defense, I have a last minute witness or whatever it is. But you can't convict someone, you can't pronounce the verdict unless the person is right there in front of you and you know who he is. And in this situation, since we don't know who the murderer is, we can't convict him, we can't convict the other people, and therefore we have to let them all go. And Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree with you in principle that you can't administer the death penalty, right, without convicting the person speaking to him directly. But what you can do is you can do a passive kind of administration of death by just locking them all up in a barn and letting them starve to death, or eating themselves to death until their stomachs burst. And Reish Lakish Omar, Reish Lakish disagrees. And he says, Ba'adam de kuli amalo pligi de pitiri, aval hacha b'shor shelo nigmar dino shenisarv b'shvorim acherim shenigmar dino kamifligi. The machlokas here says, Reish Lakish says no. Even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if you can't identify the accused at the time of the verdict, you cannot administer the death penalty either actively or passively. right? And that everyone would hold that if we're dealing with human beings, you have to let them all go. The machlokus over here is not a human who has been who has committed murder, but rather a shor who has committed murder. And just like a human being needs to have the verdict pronounced in its presence, the Chachamim hold that a shor has to have the verdict pronounced in its presence, and the Sanhedrin needs to know exactly which shor they're pronouncing the verdict against. And therefore, if this shor gets mixed up with other shavarim, not that there's anything wrong with so in that situation, we can't stone the shor because we don't know which one it is. It's been convicted. The other shvarim have also committed murder, but they haven't been convicted. And so... So it's the shor shelo nigmar dina shenitzarv b'shvarim achim shenigmar dina. One shor gets mixed in with other shvarim whose judgment has not been completed. So whose judgment has been completed. But since you have one whose verdict has not been pronounced, all of them get off scot-free. So Rabbanan Savri Kimisas Balam Kach Misas Ashor Ben Gorman Dina Shal Shor Lebafanav Hilkach Kulan Peturin. So the Chachamim say is that since you can't complete the verdict because you don't know which shor you're pronouncing the verdict against, you can't put that shor to death, and therefore all of the shvarim go free. Rabbi Yehuda Savar Konsumus on the people. And Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree with you that you can't administer actively the death penalty of stoning for the shor, but at least you can just put all of the shvarim that we know have committed murder, put them in a barn and let them starve to death. And therefore that's the solution. So this is where we'll hold it for today. Have a wonderful day.